Well, hello everyone. Today's topic is singleness and the church. My name is Carissa Savdi, and if you've followed me for a while, you know that I speak and write about this topic often. If you're interested, you can hit me up on my website, singledoutbook.com, where I blog regularly and am trying to get a book published. I'm also all over social media as Carissa Savdi, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Pinterest, LinkedIn, or you can join the Facebook group if you're a single who's interested in exploring singleness from a Christian perspective. We're at facebook.com/groups/singledoutgroups. So that's a little preamble. Doing something a bit different today. I'm joined by Alana Robinson. Alana is the executive pastor at New Life Baptist in Duncan. She and I met multiple years ago now when we attended that church together and did some worship ministry together. And she reached out and wanted to have this conversation, and I realized I get to talk about this topic all the time, but lots of people don't. And often I find myself in these chats wishing that somebody else could be a fly on the wall. So we thought, why don't we just hit record so that whoever we need to can be a fly on the wall, and hopefully this conversation will be edifying to more than just us. So I'll let Alana just sort of share maybe a little bit by way of setup, why you reached out, what it is you want to kind of talk about. This is a large topic. I'm sure we'll only make a dent in it, but just sort of to direct the conversation, and then we can sort of ignore the fact that we're being recorded and just chat.
Yeah, you bet. I guess, you know, I've watched what you've been talking about on social media just a bit over the years, as far as singleness in the church. And it's been something in the back of my mind, but COVID has really brought this to the forefront in our ministry, where the single people are saying, we see things happening and there's gatherings and it's wonderful, but we see family units being able to be together. Mm-hmm. And then the single people, because we have to physically distance, they feel even more separated than they would have even pre-COVID. Mm-hmm. And so it's, just something that we have started thinking about at our church, of how can we better minister to the single people in our congregation in a way that makes them feel included and not set apart, even within the barriers that we have with COVID here. So, yeah.
That sounds like a really good objective. And I just wanted to share that when I got your message, I think you'd worded it so like very graciously and tactfully. And we're like, oh, I don't want to offend you, but this is stuff I don't know. And I was not offended in any way. I actually just so appreciated it, because I think one of the big challenges with this topic, or really any topic of any kind of sort of diversity or not normal, is that people feel like they're supposed to know, and so they don't ask. Yeah. And so I think if we could give ourselves permission to just do what you did, which I thought was very courageous and also very vulnerable, to say, this is an area I don't know, and rather than pretend or try and make decisions for people that I don't understand, I'm just going to reach out now. So that did not offend me in any way. And if anything, it really blessed me. So I just wanted to call that out and thank you before we got too far.
Good, thanks.
Yeah. So where would you like to dig in, or where would you like to start? Like,
I mean, you're the expert on the subject. I literally know nothing. What are the things, what should we be paying attention to, and what can we do better?
Well, I mean, I guess I'll just declare, like, while I do speak fairly representatively about this, or maybe authoritatively about this, I can only speak from my single experience and from the experience of singles I've talked to. Sure. And so I know there's a whole breadth of experience I don't have. Like, I'm in my 30s and single, which is different than 20s or 40s or 50s and so on. I've never been married, so I'm not a widow, I'm not divorced. I'm not a single parent, so I don't have kids. So there's lots of experience of this that I don't have. Right. But I guess it sort of depends on what you're already doing for singles. So maybe before I answer the question, I'll poke a little bit and ask, like, what kind of made you think maybe this was a need? Like, what makes you think there's a deficit that needs to be fixed?
Yeah, I think there's two things. We don't have any type of single ministry. We have a young adult ministry, but there's singles and marrieds in there. But beyond that, we don't have anything specifically that really takes singles into consideration. We have lots of events. There's men's, there's women's, but there's very family oriented events. And I have single friends in my orbit in the ministry that are not young adults, that have just said from time to time that they feel like they don't always know where they fit because, they love the multi-generational aspect of churches, but when you put on a family event, they feel like they don't belong.
Yeah.
And then one other situation that occurred just recently was we had the opportunity to send some family groups out to Camp Imidine, which is not far from our church in Duncan. And Imidine opened up, they're shut down to overnight camps for campers, but they opened up their facilities to churches to be able to come and camp for the weekend. And so we did that. And I had another older woman who's in her 50s who is divorced say, I didn't feel like I could go because I would have to keep myself separate from people. And I felt like it would be so hard to sit and watch the family units interact, and I'm just there by myself. Mm. And so those two things just recently kind of made me think, what can we do?
Yeah.
And I don't know.
I think that one of the tricky things about this is it's the long game. And so some of what I think is going to fix the problem overall is more philosophical shifts and more mindset shifts that could take a while to bear fruit. And so I'll try and think and maybe include some really practical things too that you can get started on right away. But something I notice about this topic is that it stems from this idea that family is number one.
Yeah.
And that is a problematic idea. And I think that while there is a biblical foundation for the importance of the family, I actually believe that in modern society, we have made marriage and family a bit of an idol. Mm-hmm. And so I think part of honoring and serving singles isn't tokenism, it's about dethroning that idol. And I think as you outlined in that example you gave was so perfect, I think COVID is just magnifying how much of a problem that is. I don't think it wasn't a problem before. I think COVID's just kind of shone the light on, hey, this has always existed. And so what you described, I think, is a very typical church problem. Not every individual church is going to have this issue. And I mean, like small C church right now, speaking sort of denominationally. But as a rule of thumb, I think that most churches are sort of built around this family model. And so we have kids ministry, youth ministry, young adult ministry. There's this kind of weird gap. Maybe we stick some young marrieds in there. And then it kind of gets into sort of family-ish ministry. And if there's men's and women's, it's about parenting and marriage. And then we don't really pick up singles again until we hit like divorce care. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And all along the way, there's singles. And I think the reason that seems like a problem is because it's not about them having their own category. It's recognizing they fit in all of those categories all along the way, and they're getting neglected along the way. And so I think it's about integrating the body more than it is about serving the singles. Because I think when we look at the New Testament and the examples of scripture, when we look at the Old Testament and the examples of community, we see the older with the younger and a discipleship model. And that doesn't break into age and demographic and relationship status groups. And I think that's where the tension is that we sort of have a flawed model to begin with. So it's kind of hard to fix that model without kind of tearing the whole thing apart.
Right.
So that's maybe not super helpful, but I think that like it's sort of the back of my mind, that's always the And I am not an advocate for singles ministry and never have been. That other people could totally disagree with me. I have found that singles ministry often ends up being just lumped in with young adults. And I'm sorry, but 25 doesn't have a lot in common with 18. 35 may not have a lot in common with 25. Like, I just don't think that it makes a lot of sense. I think that often singles ministry ends up being about getting you married ministry, like it becomes couple-ish or potential couples ministry and very meat markety. And so I think that some of the questions to ask about how to serve singles, it's like, how have we been excluding singles? And how could we flip that into inclusion? Because is there any reason why a single wouldn't want to attend something that was already happening? And so those kinds of questions, and my guess is the answers are going to be, I don't really belong there. They're always talking about marriage. It's always about family. Like, it's not thinking about me as a person. It's seeing me as a prospective spouse, but not a full person right now. So I think if you kind of tap into those reasons in your community, it'll
Yeah.
kind of reveal, oh, we've been exclusive in this way, so now we can be inclusive in this way.
Mm-hmm. So does a lot of it come down to the language we're using too? I mean, if we take family specific events and ministries out of it, because there's lots of other things that we do too, do we need to be more careful in the language that we're using? Or
I think more careful in the language is a start. I think that can very quickly be patronizing or tokenistic. I'm making up words for you. I think it's adding, not subtracting. And so, a big way that this shows up is in celebration. Like the church celebrates engagements and marriages and baby dedications and anniversaries, and that's great. But what are the things to be celebrated about singleness that maybe are common to other people too? Like, do we do a good job of celebrating promotions? Of, like you mentioned to me, I think before we went on camera, that you're doing a master's degree. Like, that's a big deal. And there's not really a space in Christian community to celebrate stuff like that. And so I think one of the ways we can start to shift is just be mindful of how are we making sure that everyone is being celebrated and their accomplishments and what's going on in their life is valued as part of the conversation. And I think that applies to married people too, because if all the family stuff is just, well, come talk about your marriage and come talk about your kids, it's like, yep, that's important. And you're going to work and you have education and you have, health milestones and you're running marathons and all of these other things that you're doing that I think we just kind of forget about. And so I don't know how much of that's a language shift and more of a just like a mindset of like, who are we as whole people, regardless of our relationship status, and how are we honoring and serving and celebrating ourselves as whole people?
Yeah.
Is that useful?
Yep, definitely.
One thing I'll say too is like this COVID thing is like, I think there is a light being shone on isolation and singles who maybe live alone and were disconnected. Now it's like a lot worse. But it's also a lot worse for families too. I had sort of a eureka moment on the phone with a married friend, kind of in the heart of really extreme lockdown when, they were saying don't go into other people's houses and everything.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my goodness, I don't think I've touched another human in 3 weeks. And she was like, I don't think I have been out of the same room as another human for 3 weeks. And I was like, oh, right. This season is hard for all of us. And I don't think we need to kind of play the victim either of getting into it's harder for you or it's harder for me. But what are the unique needs of singles right now? And it might be having to think outside of like everyone's at home and they're doing home church together and they have each other. Well, who might singles have and who might they need to connect with and what might their needs be and how much harder is life in isolation just being one person than two? And again, that's not a new problem because I had that problem before, right? Like I had a hard time, like I can't do everything, like I'm not handy and good at accounting and good at cooking and like sort of all the tasks of being an adult, they're all on me. And so something that really blesses me is when somebody sees, oh, I have a gift in this area or a talent and I can serve Carissa in this way, and just really practical, helpful things like, hey, let me be your drive you to the airport person. Hey, let me be your drive you to the emergency room person. Hey, let me, like call on me when you have things that need fixing and that sort of thing. So I think that's always been the need of singles in sort of the broader community. I think it's just amplified right now. And so in some ways, we have this lovely excuse to ask questions and kind of start things that we might feel silly about in other contexts and be like, oh, it's because of COVID, and maybe start serving singles in a way better way than we were before without feeling foolish for not having done it.
Great. That's a good one. Okay. So this is where my mind goes now. If we're changing our mindset, so from the organizational standpoint, we have to change our mindset of how we are viewing these things, of what we're celebrating, and how are we maybe unintentionally excluding singles by the programs that we put on. how can we help change the mindset then on the other side? Because if I go back to this camp out example, it wasn't advertised as a family camp out in any way, shape, or form. And we had lots of, retirees, the couples go that don't have kids, but it was never specifically targeted as a family camp out. But I still had this single person say, I couldn't go. So how do I help shift the mindset on the other side to say, so that they can feel like, or recognize that they're not actually being excluded? Does that make sense?
Totally. I mean, I think, sort of basic principles is you can extend an invitation and you can offer influence, and then what people choose to do with it is different. So I don't think you are responsible to shift the mindset of singles. But I think some ways that you could encourage that shift. I mean, in that particular example, that's a lovely one, because it could have been as simple as like, oh, I'm sorry that would be hard for you to witness. I can understand that. But we are a broader family or a larger community, and we would hate to exclude you. We'd love you to be there. I realize it could be difficult, so if you don't want to, that's fine, but we would love you to be there. Do you know what I mean? Kind of like the invitation is there. Or even maybe is there anything we could do to make you a little bit more comfortable in that environment? Is there anything that we're doing that's making you feel excluded? And sort of kind of prompting them to own where that's their own stuff they have to work through versus, you know what I mean? Because it's really easy to take offense. But I think the other thing too, again, the long game, it's kind of stemming from a theology that I think is very prevalent, which is that marriage is better. Marriage is better. And that is not biblical. But we kind of promote that ideology all the time. And so again, kind of coming back to what is in your sphere of control is like, how might you be contributing to promoting that ideology? And that might be more of a language thing. Like you asked about language before, like, are we talking about singleness like it's seasonal? Because that kind of assumes that it's going to be over sometime, and that it should be over sometime, which kind of makes you feel like if it's not over for me, then I'm failing. Right? Are we talking about romantic love as the be all and end all, or is it the love of Christ that's the be all and end all? And so what ways are we kind of contributing to that mythology that marriage is better? It can be simple things, like I don't know what's the culture at your church. If people meet single people, is the first thing they're trying to do is set them up with someone. And not to say that that's bad or that's wrong. And I know there's a lot of singles who actually welcome that kind of energy, but are they seen as a whole person or half of a future whole? And so those kind of things are attitudes that, yes, us as singles, we need to reckon with that, and we need to do the work, and we need to come before the Father and ask to reveal what attitudes and perceptions are incorrect in our heart, and how does He see us? And we can be encouraged and discipled into that, but that's our work to do. I think the work of the broader church is kind of like, wait a second, how might I be perpetuating that problematic thinking or that myth, or and maybe asking, so maybe the next time someone says, oh, I don't want to come, it's going to be too hard, poking a little and go, can I ask what makes that hard for you? Or can I ask what would make it easier? Or is this about you and how you feel about your singleness, or how you think I view your singleness? And kind of digging a little bit deeper on that, because it could be any of those things.
Okay. I thought of it too, so we're moving into a house church model in the fall, and the pastor leading the charge on house churches is also the pastor of families. So he's already geared towards families, and a lot of his language is geared towards that. But we don't want the house churches to be separated by demographic. We actually want them to be intergenerational and have families with singles and with elderly and with young and all that kind of stuff. So that's why I asked about language earlier, because I think we probably do veer towards the language of families, just because that's the coming from. But I do. As I look forward into the fall, I go, how do we help everyone embrace like this multi-demographic, multi-generational house church concept, and not feel excluded or pigeonholed or
I don't, share as much as you're comfortable, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm curious if it would be an option to have a single person collaborate with the person in charge of house churches, or is there a single person on your board, or is there a single person on your staff?
Right.
And I think it's not dissimilar from a lot of other diversity stuff we're kind of unlearning and learning in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, it's like if those voices and perspectives don't have a seat at the table, of course we're excluding them. And so it's not, I don't think it's tokenism to get that person a seat at the table. And it could feel a little bit awkward, and it could feel like we need a single person. And like, I just don't know any way around the awkwardness of it, because at some point we need that perspective. And so, you get it through conversations like this, but how much better if it's someone within your community who has a vested interest, who can sort of rally others and really contribute to the ongoing mission. And I think that is why these attitudes are so prevalent in the church, because you tell me a lead pastor of an evangelical church who isn't married with family, like that is so rare. And so the people with the microphone and the people at the, in the chair's seat, they're not thinking it's I don't think it's meant to be malicious or exclusive, or it's literally a gap. They just don't see it. They don't know. And so how can we bring people of all different life experiences, including relationship status, into the fold? And that could be tricky, because maybe they'll meet someone to get married and then you need to find a new one.
No kidding. Okay. No, that's a really good idea.
And like, I think the house church thing is just awkward anyway. I think it's such a necessary shift. I don't think the church was ever supposed to be a big building full of people. I think it was always supposed to be like one-on-one discipleship. But it's not an easy shift, because we've had the old model for years and years and years. And so there's a lot about this time that is just uncomfortable. And I don't think we can see discomfort as a reason not to do it, or as a reason not to kind of push through and say, no, we're going to make it work. And there's risk in it, right? Like it's easy to attend anonymously. It's easy to sit back, and it's easy to just feel like a victim. Like I, as a single, could sit back and go, why isn't my church serving me? Or I can go, oh my goodness, if I want to be part of community, I have to agree to sit in someone else's home, and it might be weird, and I might not know them very well. And how else are we going to build community right now?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's definitely going to be a shift for us. A good one, but that's exactly what we're saying too, is that the pre-COVID North American model of church is not what it was meant to be. And we want to kind of shed some of those, it's a strong language, but shed some of those idols that we made out of what we thought church was. So
and I think
scary. No, I was saying it's exciting and scary at the same time.
Totally. And I actually think singles have a unique role, and possibly a leadership role, in making some of this happen, because like when you look at the New Testament model of church, it was a lot of single people making a lot happen. And particularly when you think about our two pioneers of the church, Jesus and Paul, both single. And I think there's something to that sort of ability to have undivided attention, that ability to think more strategically and not be distracted by the obligations of marriage and family. Like right now, I'm not having to factor in kids in the background of this call. I'm not having to worry about the internet connection and sharing it with my husband. Like I don't have to think about those things, whereas I'm sure that was part of you planning this evening, right? And so I just think, wouldn't it be neat if this was actually a time for singles to step up and say, I have time to prepare some Bible study questions, or I have time to pray about that this week, or you know what, I don't have a big home, but I can take on the hosting role, or I can make the food or whatever. Like I think there's actually an opportunity right now for singles to step up and in a way that they haven't been sort of welcome or invited to before. Because it's kind of anyone's game. It doesn't matter if you have a Bible college degree. It doesn't matter if you're a pastor or not. Like none of that stuff should have ever mattered, but now it matters even less. And so what a great time for us to kind of break out of the box of what we think of in terms of church.
Yeah, for sure. I like that.
Yeah.
I'm making notes.
Oh, yay. That's always fun. What else?
Those are my key ones that I had thought of. I mean,
Okay.
yeah. What am I missing?
Oh man.
Asking.
Yeah, thanks. You mentioned about language shifts, and I was kind of thinking as you were talking a bit before, and some really simple ones we can make. I think I mentioned seasonal. I think I advocate to stop talking about singleness as if it's a season, or really to stop talking about marriage as if it's inevitable, like it will happen. You know, I've shifted my own language. I no longer say when I get married or when I have kids, and I say if, and I think that's actually biblical. I can't remember the passage, but it's like, no man should say, tomorrow I'll go do this, or tomorrow I'll go do that, but they should say, if the Lord wills it. And COVID's reminding us of that important tentative language. Like I've heard people say COVID willing, and I'm like, wait, like Lord willing, I will do this. So I think removing sort of the expectation or the assumption that marriage will happen is a big one. I think in terms of any sort of dialogue around sexuality, and I think the sort of concept of like wait until you're married, or that sexuality is a marriage issue, and anything sexual before marriage is wrong and bad, and like kind of it just doesn't open or include the dialogue at all about what it means to be celibate, if that's what you're aiming for, how you do those things. And so marriage is just sort of dangled out there as this carrot of like, if you stay celibate while you're single, then you'll get to have a great sex life. And that's not what the Bible says. The Bible says, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. And so any way that we honor purity brings us closer to God and gives us clarity about his will for our lives. So that's another language one. I think I mentioned sort of the concept of serving singles through celebration, through like practical offerings of things that can be done, or ways that you can engage in help and be community. And I think the other one might be around sort of family in general, of recognizing, you know, that example that you gave of that woman. I wonder if some of the heartache is about not having her own family, and really that shouldn't be the case in the family of God. Like the Old Testament command from God, right in Genesis, was be fruitful and multiply. But the New Testament commandment from Jesus was go and make disciples. And so the method of disciple making has changed. Like you have, as a mother, literally produced disciples. But I, as a single, can also make disciples. And so that isn't an exclusive mandate. And I think that doesn't mean that I don't long for children or motherhood and things, but that I think is the importance and the value of the larger church, is that maybe I don't have to have my own kids to be exposed to children and to have an influential mentoring role, and to have just the delight of little people in my world. And I think if we were kind of getting that better, that we would see less people feeling like they have to make family on their own, and more like, oh, I wanted that, but I'm part of a family, and so that's okay. I think the other thing I would say is that there's a real tension to be managed between honoring the value of singleness and the grief of singleness. And so I think that what people want to do is do one or the other. Either singleness is terrible and we should be trying to get everybody out of it and fix them up and get married, or singleness is amazing and why is anybody married? And I think it's actually in between. I think it's that I can, as a single, long for a partner or a spouse and kind of grieve that maybe that hasn't happened for me, and feel fully loved and fully whole in the presence of God, and that those things aren't mutually exclusive. And I think for the broader Christian community to embrace that as well, that sometimes serving a single is playing matchmaker, or it is praying for them to find a spouse, or it is sitting with them in their grief about not having those things. And sometimes it's encouraging them and going, whoa, does that mean God doesn't have a plan for your life? No. Like, and challenging them to step up and step forward and embrace what God's got for them. And so I don't think it's about shifting to this other extreme of rah singleness. And I think we can hold both.
Right. Yeah. Really good point. I like that. Okay.
Anything else before we?
That's all I can think of. I think that's really helpful, though. It is.
Okay.
Especially, I really like the part about having, the single person at the table in the conversation. we don't have that. We have one single person on staff, but he's in a relationship.
Right.
So yeah, we definitely don't have that. And I think that would be really, really valuable, especially moving forward in the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that when you just said we have a single person on staff and he's in a relationship, I think that's the other temptation with content, both in conversation and content for programs and content for sermons, is that we gear our content towards singles as like marriage preparation instead of just like how to be a human. And I think that would be valuable for married people too, right? Because I'm sure you know married people, I sure do, who thought that marriage was going to be this all-fulfilling thing and then got into it and went, whoops, nope. And how much better prepared they would have been for a healthy marriage if they'd realized, oh, like there's so much more to life than a romantic relationship. Oh, there's so much more to faith than just being a good husband or a good wife or a good father or a good mother. And to, you know, that we can all talk about. Like we could literally all talk about, what does it mean to be a human? What does it mean to follow the Lord? What is it, you know, how does the New Testament apply to me? If we kind of stop hanging out in just those passages in Ephesians that talk about marriage, and, do you know what I mean? Like there's so much that applies to all of us. And so I think that's the kind of historically what has happened when, our church is going to embrace singleness, as they start talking about dating. I'm like, singleness and dating aren't the same thing. Like dating can be a part of singleness, but let's just talk about what it is to be human, what it is to be a child of God.
Yeah. Amen to that.
Amen. Well, maybe let's just close with prayer. Maybe I'll just pray for you and your endeavors. Does that sound good?
That'd be great. Thank you.
Well, God, I just thank you for this time and this conversation, and for your heart for the singles that are in Alana's sphere right now. And thank you that she's just been willing to be open and curious. And I just ask that you continue to guide her and direct her next steps and her next conversations. And we just pray for the single people in that community, that they would feel seen by you first and foremost. They would know that they have your ear, that they can listen to your voice, that you have a plan for them, that your love and your purpose for them is not tied to a relationship status, but also, God, that you would give them and those that surround them new and creative ideas and ways of serving each other in love and of edifying each other and building each other up. We just thank you for this season in sort of the global church, of what this pandemic is causing us to do, which is to get back to the basics, to recognize the value of discipleship, to sort of de-expertise the church. And I just pray for those who are in positions of influence and trying to serve and to shepherd and to steward, that you would just give them such wisdom, that you would give them hearts of compassion, that you would give them insight as to how to serve the people around them. But for all of us who claim you, Lord, that we would step up as believers and learn how to love those around us, learn how to serve those around us, learn how to dig in and how to be vulnerable in both being discipled and in offering discipleship to others. So thank you for this conversation. We just ask that it would continue to produce fruit long after we hang up. And we ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Well, it's good seeing you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate that.
Yeah, I appreciate it too.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.